The rain had stopped an hour before dawn, but the jungle still dripped. Each leaf held water like a cupped hand, releasing it in slow, deliberate drops that echoed through the canopy. Sergeant Thomas Michael Carver pressed himself deeper into the mud at the base of a strangler fig, feeling the cold seep through his fatigues and into the bandage wrapped tight around his left shoulder. The wound was 4 days old, a through and through from a Viet Cong AK round that had found him during an ambush near the Song Bo River. The battalion medic had stitched it closed and pumped him full of antibiotics. But out here, 15 kilometers northwest of Hue City in Thua Thien province, infection was as likely to kill him as a bullet. He could feel the heat radiating from the wound even in the pre-dawn chill, a dull throb that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Carver was 26 years old, born and raised in rural Kentucky, where his father had taught him to shoot white-tailed deer from a ridge overlooking their tobacco farm. He had carried a rifle before he could read, and by the time he enlisted in 1965, he could put a round through a silver dollar at 300 yards. The Army had recognized that gift and trained him further, assigned him to the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, as a designated marksman. His weapon was an M40 sniper rifle, a bolt-action Remington 700 chambered in 7.62 51 mm NATO, fitted with a Redfield 3.9x scope that he kept wrapped in an oiled cloth when not in use. He had 11 rounds left in his pouch. The humidity played hell with the optics, fogging the lenses in the early morning, and the dampness made the powder burn slower, affecting his point of impact. He had learned to compensate, but it was never perfect. For 3 days, Carver had been hunting a ghost. Intelligence reports from Marine Recon and South Vietnamese scouts spoke of a North Vietnamese sniper operating in this sector, a man who had killed at least 9 American soldiers in the past 2 weeks. The kills were clean, professional, always at distance, always from concealment. 1 shot, 1 kill. No wasted ammunition. The enemy marksman moved like smoke through the jungle, never leaving a trace, never firing twice from the same position. 2 patrols had tried to locate him and failed. 1 squad leader had been shot through the temple while standing behind a tree, the round threading through a gap in the foliage so narrow it seemed impossible. That was when Carver's lieutenant had pulled him aside and given him the mission. Find him. Kill him. Come back alive. Carver shifted his weight slightly, feeling the slick clay beneath him. He had coated his face and hands with a mixture of mud, crushed charcoal from a burnt-out hooch, and rotting leaves, blending his skin into the texture of the jungle floor. He had learned this from an old Marine gunnery sergeant who had survived Korea, a man who understood that in the bush, contrast killed you faster than hesitation. The scope on his rifle was wrapped in frayed cloth, preventing any glint of sunlight from giving away his position. He breathed through his mouth, slow and shallow, counting each inhalation to keep his heart rate down. Every 30 seconds, he scanned the terrain ahead through the scope, moving his eyes rather than the barrel, searching for the smallest inconsistency in the landscape. A shadow that did not move with the wind, a shape too symmetrical to be natural. The muzzle of a rifle resting on a branch. The jungle around him was waking. Insects began their high-pitched drone, a sound that would grow unbearable by midday. Somewhere in the canopy a gibbon howled, a long, mournful call that made Carver think of Sunday mornings back home, the church bells ringing across the valley, while his mother fried eggs and country ham. He had not been to a service in over a year, but he still carried a pocket New Testament in his left breast pocket, the pages swollen and stuck together from sweat and rain. His mother had given it to him the day he shipped out, pressing it into his hand and telling him to read Psalm 91 whenever he felt afraid. He had read it so many times that he could recite it by heart. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. But the secret place was a mud pit in a jungle that wanted to kill him, and the shadow was cast by an enemy he had never seen. Carver's shoulder throbbed. He could feel the stitches pulling tight whenever he moved, and the skin around the wound was hot to the touch, a warning sign he tried to ignore. The medic had told him to stay off patrol for a week, But Carver had requested this mission anyway. Part of it was duty. Part of it was something darker, something he did not want to name. He had lost 2 men from his platoon in the ambush near the river. Private First Class Danny Ortiz, a kid from Los Angeles who played harmonica around the fire base and talked endlessly about his girlfriend back home. And Corporal James Lee, a quiet North Carolinian who had saved Carver's life once by spotting a punji steak pit covered with leaves. Both of them had died within seconds of each other, cut down by automatic fire from a tree line they had thought was clear. Carver had been 20 meters behind them, carrying the radio. He had watched them fall, and had done nothing, frozen in place while the rest of the squad returned fire. By the time he moved, it was too late. He had crawled to their bodies under covering fire, but there was nothing to do except close their eyes and call in a dust-off. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone, cold and immovable, and he knew the only way to lighten it was to finish this mission. The light changed. The sun had broken the horizon, casting long fingers of gold through the canopy. Carver adjusted his position, moving inch by inch, redistributing his weight to avoid cramping. He was lying in a shallow depression between 2 exposed roots, his rifle resting on a bed of moss he had shaped with his hands. The barrel pointed toward a small clearing 80 meters ahead, where a trail intersected with a dry stream bed. According to the map, this was a known infiltration route used by Viet Cong moving supplies south from the DMZ. If the enemy sniper was operating in this area, he would have to cross this ground eventually. Carver had chosen his hide carefully, positioning himself downwind and low, with multiple escape routes behind him. He had memorized the terrain, counting trees and landmarks, so he could withdraw without looking. An hour passed, then another. The heat climbed. Carver's canteen was half empty, but he resisted the urge to drink. Thirst was manageable. Noise was not. He listened to the jungle, filtering through the layers of sound for anything human. The rustle of fabric against bark, the click of metal on metal, the soft scuff of a boot heel on stone. He heard none of these things, only the endless chatter of insects and the occasional crack of a distant artillery round, a reminder that somewhere beyond the trees the war continued without him. Around mid-morning, movement. Carver's pulse quickened. 3 figures emerged from the jungle on the far side of the clearing, moving in single file along the trail. Viet Cong. They wore black pajamas and soft hats, carrying AK-47 rifles slung over their shoulders. They moved cautiously, but not with the exaggerated stealth of soldiers who expected contact. They were transporting something, a wooden crate balanced between 2 of them. Carver watched them through his scope, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. He counted their steps, calculated the range, adjusted for the slight crosswind blowing left to right. He could take one of them easily, maybe 2 before they scattered. But that was not his mission. He was not here to engage a patrol. He was here for the sniper. The 3 men crossed the clearing and disappeared into the jungle on the opposite side. Carver exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his muscles. His shoulder was screaming now, a sharp, biting pain that made it difficult to concentrate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 aspirin tablets, chewing them dry. The taste was bitter and chalky, but the pain receded slightly, enough to function. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening. The jungle had gone quiet. The insects had stopped buzzing. That was wrong. That was a sign. Carver opened his eyes and scanned the tree line again, this time moving his scope more slowly, examining every shadow, every gap in the foliage. And then he saw it. A shape, barely perceptible. A darker patch of green against the trunk of a mahogany tree, 60 meters to his left, elevated 15 feet off the ground. It could have been a clump of vines, it could have been a shadow, but it was too regular, too still. Carver's breath caught. He shifted the scope fractionally, bringing the shape into sharper focus. And there, just visible through the leaves, he saw the outline of a rifle barrel, angled downward, pointing toward the clearing he had been watching. The enemy sniper was less than 70 meters away, and he was looking in the wrong direction. Carver's mind raced. The other man had not seen him. If he had, Carver would already be dead. But the Viet Cong marksman was positioned to cover the same trail, the same clearing. They had both chosen the same kill zone. That meant the enemy knew the terrain as well as Carver did, maybe better. It also meant that the slightest movement, the smallest sound, would give Carver away. He could not shift his rifle without risking detection. He could not withdraw without breaking concealment. He was pinned. Carver forced himself to breathe. In through the mouth, out through the nose. Slow, controlled. He thought of his father, teaching him to still his mind before a shot. Wait for the heartbeat to slow. Wait for the world to go quiet. Then squeeze. But this was different. This was not a deer on a ridgeline. This was a man who could kill him just as easily. He watched the shape in the tree. The enemy sniper did not move. Minutes crawled by. Carver's legs began to cramp, the muscles in his thighs twitching involuntarily. He clenched his jaw and willed them to stop. Sweat ran down his face, cutting lines through the mud on his cheeks. A mosquito landed on his neck and bit him, but he did not flinch. He counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. He prayed silently, the words forming in his mind without sound. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And then, in the distance, the sound of a helicopter. A UH-1 Huey, the distinctive thwop-thwop of its rotors cutting through the humid air. It was flying low, maybe half a kilometer to the south, probably a medevac or a resupply run. The sound grew louder, closer. Carver saw his opportunity. When the helicopter passed overhead, the noise would cover any movement. He could adjust his position. He could bring his rifle to bear. The Huey came closer. The sound was deafening now, drowning out everything else. Carver watched the enemy sniper through his scope. The man's head turned slightly, tracking the sound of the helicopter. And in that moment, Carver moved. He shifted his weight, brought his rifle up, settled the crosshairs on the dark shape in the tree. His finger slipped inside the trigger guard. He exhaled halfway and held it. The helicopter roared overhead, shaking the leaves. Carver began to squeeze. The shape in the tree moved. Fast. Too fast. The enemy sniper dropped from the branch and disappeared behind the trunk. Carver's shot went wide, the round slamming into the bark 6 inches to the left. The sound of the rifle was swallowed by the noise of the helicopter, but the impact was visible. A spray of wood chips, a puff of dust. Carver rolled left, abandoning his hide, moving on instinct. He did not stop to think. He crawled into the underbrush, dragging his rifle, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. Behind him, he heard the snap of a branch. The enemy sniper was moving too, repositioning. The duel had begun. If you want to know how this deadly game of cat and mouse ends, who survives and who falls, stay with me until the final shot is fired. Carver moved through the undergrowth like a wounded animal, staying low, using every depression in the ground for cover. His shoulder screamed with each movement, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing only on survival. The helicopter had passed, and the jungle had returned to its heavy silence, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery and the pounding of his own heart. He had lost the advantage of surprise. Now it was a matter of who made the first mistake. He crawled for 30 meters before stopping behind a fallen teak log, its surface carpeted with moss and fungus. He pressed himself against it, breathing hard, listening. The enemy sniper would be moving too, trying to circle around, trying to gain a better angle. Carver had to think like his opponent. Where would he go? What would he do? He closed his eyes and visualized the terrain, the map he had memorized, the positions they had both occupied. The Vietnamese marksman had been elevated, which meant he favored high ground. He would likely move to another tree, another vantage point, somewhere with clear lines of sight and multiple escape routes. Carver scanned the canopy through his scope, moving slowly, breathing through his mouth to minimize sound. The light had shifted. It was nearly noon now, and the sun burned white through the leaves, creating patterns of shadow and brightness that played tricks on the eyes. He saw nothing, no movement, no shape that did not belong. The enemy had vanished. Minutes passed, 5, 10. Carver's legs were cramping again, and his throat was parched. He allowed himself a single sip from his canteen, tilting it carefully to avoid the sound of sloshing water. The liquid was warm and tasted of plastic, but it was enough. He screwed the cap back on and returned the canteen to his belt without making a sound. Then he heard it, a whisper of fabric against bark, soft, barely audible. Somewhere to his right, maybe 40 meters away. Carver froze. His eyes tracked toward the sound, but he did not move his head. Movement drew the eye. Stillness was survival. He waited. The sound came again, closer this time. The enemy sniper was stalking him, moving through the jungle with a patience that matched his own. Carver considered his options. He could stay hidden and hope the other man passed by. He could try to withdraw, slipping deeper into the jungle and breaking contact. Or he could set a trap. He thought of Corporal Lee, the way he had died, cut down in an instant because he had trusted the tree line. He thought of Private Ortiz, the harmonica that would never play again. And he thought of the men still alive back at the firebase, the ones who would die if this enemy sniper was not stopped. He made his decision. Slowly, carefully, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a grenade. It was an M26 fragmentation grenade, olive drab, slightly dented on one side. He had carried it for 3 months without using it. He checked the pin, making sure it was secure, then placed it on the ground beside him. Then he removed his helmet, the steel pot that had saved his life more than once, and set it on top of the log, positioning it so that from a distance it might look like the crown of a man's head. It was an old trick, something the Marines had done in the Pacific during World War II. It would not fool an experienced sniper for long, but it might buy him a second. 1 second to locate the enemy's position. 1 second to take the shot. Carver moved backward, sliding on his belly, putting distance between himself and the helmet. He positioned himself behind a cluster of bamboo, his rifle aimed toward the log, his breathing slow and controlled. Then he waited. The jungle sounds returned gradually. The insects resumed their buzzing. A bird called from somewhere overhead, a sharp, piercing cry. Carver's finger rested on the trigger guard. He counted his heartbeats. 72 per minute. Faster than he wanted, but steady. He thought about the psalm his mother had given him, the words that promised protection. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. He wanted to believe it. He needed to believe it. And then the shot came. A sharp crack that echoed through the trees, followed by the metallic ring of a bullet striking steel. The helmet jumped off the log and spun through the air, landing in the dirt with a hollow thud. Carver's eyes snapped toward the source of the sound. There, 15 degrees to the right, 35 meters away, partially concealed behind a strangler fig. A shadow moved. A rifle barrel withdrew. Carver fired. The M40 bucked against his shoulder, the recoil driving into his wound like a knife. He worked the bolt instantly, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. The shadow jerked but did not fall. Carver had hit the tree, not the man. He cursed silently and shifted his aim, but the enemy had already moved, dropping behind cover. The jungle exploded with sound. The enemy sniper returned fire, 3 quick shots that cracked through the bamboo around Carver's position. One round passed so close to his head that he felt the pressure wave against his cheek. He rolled left, abandoning his position, crawling through the underbrush as more rounds chewed through the vegetation behind him. The other man was not using a bolt-action rifle. He had something semi-automatic, probably a Dragunov or a captured M14. That gave him a rate of fire advantage. Carver's mind raced. He was hurt, outgunned, and the enemy knew approximately where he was. He needed to change the dynamic. He reached for the grenade, pulled the pin, counted to 2, and hurled it toward the strangler fig. The grenade arced through the air and disappeared into the foliage. Carver buried his face in the dirt and covered his head. The explosion was deafening, a burst of fire and smoke and shrapnel that ripped through the jungle like the hand of God. Birds erupted from the canopy, screaming. Debris rained down, leaves and bark and fragments of metal. Carver's ears rang, a high-pitched whine that drowned out everything else. He lifted his head, blinking through the dust, and scanned the area where the enemy had been. Nothing. No body. No blood. The jungle was torn apart, shredded vegetation hanging in tatters, but the enemy sniper had moved before the grenade detonated. He was still out there, still hunting. Carver pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the pain, and began to move. He could not stay in one place. He had to keep moving, keep the enemy guessing. He crashed through the undergrowth, no longer worried about noise, focused only on creating distance. His shoulder was bleeding again, the bandage soaked through, and he could feel warm liquid running down his arm. He did not have much time. The infection, the blood loss, the heat, any one of them could finish what the enemy sniper had started. He ran for 200 meters before stopping beside a bomb crater, a muddy depression filled with stagnant water and the rusted remains of an unexploded shell. He dropped to one knee, gasping for air, and checked his ammunition. 7 rounds left. He reloaded the rifle, his hands shaking slightly, and tried to think clearly. The enemy would be following, tracking him by sound. But Carver had led him away from the original ambush site, deeper into the jungle, away from the trails and clearings. This was now unfamiliar ground for both of them. Carver looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, still hours away from setting but low enough to change the angle of light. Long shadows stretched across the forest floor. He thought about nightfall. If he could survive until dark, he could withdraw under cover of darkness, make his way back to friendly lines. But the enemy might have the same idea. And in the dark, with his wound and his exhaustion, Carver's chances dropped significantly. He heard movement again. Closer this time. The enemy sniper was not giving up. Carver wiped the sweat from his eyes and forced himself to focus. He scanned the terrain, looking for an advantage, any edge that would tip the balance in his favor. And then he saw it. A narrow ravine, maybe 40 meters to his left, choked with vegetation and fallen branches. It was a natural funnel, a place where the enemy would have to slow down, where the lines of sight would compress. Carver moved toward the ravine, placing each step carefully, avoiding dry branches and loose stones. His boots sank into the mud, leaving tracks he could not avoid. But that was part of the plan. He wanted the enemy to follow. He wanted him to think Carver was wounded and desperate and running. Because at the far end of the ravine, there was a slight rise, a natural shooting position where Carver could turn and wait. He reached the end of the ravine and climbed the rise, his legs trembling with fatigue. His vision was starting to blur at the edges, and he knew the fever from his wound was getting worse. He positioned himself behind a fallen mahogany, his rifle resting on the trunk, aimed back down the ravine. Then he waited. The light continued to fade. Shadows deepened. Carver's breathing was labored now, each inhalation a conscious effort. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision, trying to stay alert. His finger found the trigger. He counted his heartbeats. 85 per minute. Too fast. He tried to slow them, breathing deeply, but it was not working. His body was failing him. And then he saw movement. A shape, low to the ground, moving through the ravine with the fluid grace of a predator. The enemy sniper. He was following Carver's tracks, his rifle held at the ready, his head turning slowly from side to side. Carver could see him clearly now through the scope. A thin man, maybe 30 years old, wearing a dark green uniform and a soft hat. His face was hard, weathered by sun and war. He moved with absolute confidence, a man who had done this many times before. Carver centered the crosshairs on the man's chest. The range was 30 meters. An easy shot, even with his shaking hands, even with his fading vision. He exhaled slowly, felt his heartbeat in his fingertips, and began to squeeze the trigger. The enemy sniper stopped. He looked up, his eyes scanning the rise, and for a single moment, the two men locked gazes across the ravine. Carver saw something in the other man's eyes. Not fear, not hatred, recognition. The understanding that they were the same. Two men trapped in a war neither had chosen, doing what they had been trained to do. Carver fired. The shot echoed through the ravine like thunder. The enemy sniper staggered backward, his rifle falling from his hands. He clutched his chest, his mouth opening in a silent gasp, and then he fell. He did not move again. Carver lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now, and his vision was swimming. He tried to stand, but his legs would not support him. He collapsed against the mahogany trunk, breathing hard, staring at the body in the ravine. He had won. He had survived. But the victory felt hollow, empty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the New Testament, the pages stuck together with sweat and rain. He opened it to Psalm 91, but the words were blurred, unreadable. He closed the book and pressed it against his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath the paper. Somewhere in the distance he heard the sound of a helicopter, a Huey, probably a medevac, searching for wounded. Carver tried to call out, but his voice was too weak. He fumbled for his radio, but the battery was dead. He had not checked it in 2 days. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. All the training, all the precautions, and he had forgotten to change the battery. The helicopter sound faded. Carver closed his eyes. The jungle was growing quiet again, settling into the stillness that came before nightfall. He thought about his mother, the way she used to sing hymns while cooking breakfast. He thought about his father, teaching him to shoot on the ridge above the tobacco farm. He thought about Corporal Lee and Private Ortiz and all the others who had not made it home. He opened his eyes one last time and looked up at the canopy. The light was golden now, filtered through 1,000 layers of green, and for a moment, it was beautiful. He thought about the enemy sniper lying in the ravine, a man whose name he would never know, whose family would never learn what happened to him. 2 ghosts in a jungle that would forget them both. Carver heard voices, American voices calling out, crashing through the undergrowth. A patrol. They had heard the shots. Help was coming. He tried to respond, but his throat was too dry. He raised one hand weakly, hoping they would see. The voices grew louder, closer, and then a face appeared above him, a young Marine with wide eyes and a dirty uniform. The Marine knelt beside him, calling for a medic, pressing a hand against Carver's shoulder to slow the bleeding. Carver tried to speak, tried to tell him about the enemy sniper in the ravine, but the words would not come. They lifted him onto a stretcher. The sky above was turning purple, the first stars beginning to emerge. Carver felt the stretcher moving, felt the rhythm of boots on jungle floor. Someone was talking to him, reassuring him, but the words were distant, muffled. He closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. 3 days later, he woke in a field hospital in Da Nang. His shoulder was wrapped in clean bandages, an IV drip running into his arm. A chaplain sat beside his bed, reading from a Bible. When Carver opened his eyes, the chaplain smiled and closed the book. "Welcome back, Sergeant," the chaplain said. "You've been asleep for a while." Carver's voice was hoarse. "The other man, the sniper." The chaplain nodded slowly. "They found him, brought his body back for identification. North Vietnamese army, one of their best. You did well." Carver turned his head away. He did not feel like he had done well. He felt tired, used up, hollow. The chaplain stood and placed a hand on Carver's good shoulder. "Rest now. You're going home." Home. The word felt strange, foreign. Carver closed his eyes again and tried to picture it. The farm, the ridge, the valley. But all he could see was the jungle, and the face of the man he had killed, and the golden light filtering through the canopy as the world grew dark. Years later, long after the war had ended and the names had been carved into black granite in Washington, Carver would return to Kentucky. He would stand on the ridge above his father's farm, the same place where he had learned to shoot, and he would remember that day in the jungle. He would remember the duel, the fear, the moment when 2 men looked at each other across a ravine and recognized their shared humanity before one of them pulled the trigger. He would remember, and he would pray. Not for victory, not for glory, but for forgiveness and for peace, and for all the ghosts that still walked through the jungles of his memory, waiting to be called home.